Friends, thanks for gathering 3 weeks in a row to talk about our young people, talk about the young people in your life, talking about the young people that are just strangers in the world around us, and also those young people that are in our church. I hope it's been, at the very least, instructive, that there's been a good amount of data shared, that you feel a little bolstered in the content, even as some of the picture that we've been painting is a little grim at times, and somewhat even discouraging. This is going to be an optimistic session, this third week of this class, where we can hopefully be excited about where we are being called to be the church to our young people. Here's your quick icebreaker. I'll just give you a minute to talk to the person next to you. What does it mean to rebel? And share an example of a time when you've been rebellious. And really engage maybe with those youthful teenage years. I'll give you about 60 seconds to have that conversation. What does it mean to rebel? And maybe share a time when you've been a little rebellious.
When you look like So I've got kind of a silly one, but
yes.
I took piano lessons when I was a teenager. Part of that was you had to practice. I was supposed to practice 30 minutes a day. So there was a time when I had a little boombox kind of thing with a tape recorder, and I recorded myself practicing. And then the next day, I went to the piano and I put the boombox down by my feet and hit play, and I just sat there. My mom was doing other stuff in the house, and for a good 15 minutes of that 30, she thought that I was actually playing the piano. I mean, I don't know what I was thinking, because I was still at the bench and I was still at the piano. But then about halfway through the shoot, taking a basket of laundry or something once, it's like, so it's still kind of a funny family story. But it was, my way of kind of pushing back on the 30 minutes. Can you believe it? I won't tell you the other one. I won't tell you the real rebellion stories. The little simple, benign one.
I was very and now well,
Okay, friends, I'm gonna bring you back around. I know it's very fun, nostalgic even to think about those times we've been a little rebellious. I'll share a time. It's an embarrassing story because it seems so silly, it seems so youthful, but that's the whole point. And I think back to this era of our middle adolescence, our teenage years. I felt compelled to be rebellious. I think it was my junior year of high school. I was a pretty good kid, and I was on the straight and narrow about just about everything. I was following the rules my parents and my church put before me, and I got to this juncture where I really felt like I needed to rebel. I needed to do something bad, something that I shouldn't do, and I thought I'm going to steal something. I'm going to steal something, and friends, I'm ashamed to admit I did steal something. I was at a Safeway, which is a grocery store. There was an apple stand right near the main entrance, and in this rebellious moment of the middle of my teenage years, I very carefully knocked an apple onto the floor and kicked it out of the door. And I walked out of that store. I had no intention of taking the apple or eating the apple. I just wanted to rebel. And mission accomplished. I technically stole, even though the apple was never in my possession, it was no longer in the store's possession. And so I think that constituted theft. Don't tell anyone. I don't want to get any trouble.
Actually, it was an apple too.
I know it's an apple. It's just me, Adam and Eve. So, but it tells you something about the teenage psyche, where there's something compelling us towards rebellion, and we often need to fight that compulsion, but not today. Today I'm going to ask us to interact with our rebellious natures, because sometimes to rebel is just to go against the status quo. And in this case, that'll be supremely helpful. That'll actually give us the best shot at making changes in our world, because the status quo, what we're rebelling against, is we're finding out not very healthy for our young people.
how much internet phone usage, the apps. We want to rebel against some of these larger structures. So our first week, just to recap, was just us sort of screaming, this does not look good. It was this sort of hair on fire, running around the house sort of moment, because as we looked at the data, we could sort of clearly tell that this is impacting a large percentage of our young people. 25, 33%, a quarter, a third of our young people are contending with these really depressing issues, literally. It's affecting the mental health of our young people. Week 2, we shifted to the positive. We said, in light of those realities, we need to be intentional about how we come to care for those individual relationships with our lives, those personal, those teenagers that we personally love, that we want to impart some care for. And where we're headed today is how the church can be countercultural, which is nothing new to the church. The church in every era and every generation has been called to be countercultural, because often culture does not move in the same rhythms and patterns as God and God's kingdom. And so as we think about this, the status quo, those things that we need to change, we want to think about rebelling in the Spirit of God towards a thing that doesn't look so much like culture, but instead looks like a holistic, loving ministry of Christ. This has been a very natural progression in our conversation. We've identified there's a real issue. I don't think anyone in the room is thinking, oh, our teenagers have developed healthy boundaries as it relates to their phones and technology and social media. And then we said, okay, well, we need to then enact some change, and we'll do this personally. We are empowered as individuals to go meet the needs of the teenagers in our midst, that we can love on them in these direct and maybe intentional ways, the ways that we lifted up as a gentle and loving and caring posture. Well, today we want to move towards a recourse that includes the systemic. It's not just about our ability as individuals with our own gifts to meet the individuals in our lives, but what can we as the church do to change our culture that embraces a whole host of young people that are presently a part of this church community and for the generations to come. And so that's what we're going to do. Did anyone have a hard time thinking of an example where they were rebellious? Do we have some rule followers in here? Susan? Yes. Sometimes it's, as my wife came in, McKay's a rule follower. I know this about her. Those of us who are rule followers, it's a little harder to break the status quo, because we are really, we like to follow the rules, and the status quo often feels like rules. Those of us where it was easy to engage with our rebel, I heard John talking about this is a troubled child. This man, he knows what it means to be and look rebellious, and so we might, if they're on the rebellious side of the scale, you might be a little more comfortable in challenging the status quo. Though all of us are likely a little adverse to confrontation, and all of us are a little okay with when things and times are simpler and easier. That's human nature. We get complacent because complacency is often comfortable. But to compete with the status quo, we're actually having to put forth more work, utilize more resources to break the patterns. Typically, this requires some degree of inspiration, education, and articulation. We need to be able to move towards change confidently. We're not confident in what we're moving towards or how to move towards it. It's really hard to get the ball rolling, especially when the world, the status quo, is saying, this is just fine, leave it be. But the first 2 weeks of our class, I think, have shown us just how we should not leave it be. There are just a couple of paragraphs I want to read out of this resource. This is the Jonathan Haidt book, The Anxious Generation, that we've been using heavily in this class. And this is about starting to break the mold. How do we confront the status quo? What are the moves we should be making as institutions and as individuals? And I want to read just a few pages out of this as it relates to our collective action. What do we as a community do? He writes, when new consumer products are found to be dangerous, especially for children, we recall them and keep them off the market until the manufacturer corrects the design. That's the typical, in terms of our consumeristic tendencies, that's the norm. We have not seen that so much with phones and with social media and internet access, though we're starting to see these things. He writes about collective action problems. Social scientists have long studied traps where each individual does what she thinks is best for herself, such as overfishing in a local pond, even though when everyone makes the same choice, it leads to a bad outcome for all. The pond stops producing any fish. If the group could coordinate, such as by setting a limit on how many fish each resident can take, the long-term outcome would be far more fish for everyone. These traps are called collective action problems or sometimes social dilemmas. Preteens are trapped in a collective action problem when they arrive for their first day of sixth grade and see that some of their classmates have gotten smartphones. That puts pressure on them to get a smartphone and social media, even though all students would be better off if none of them had these things. This is a common issue. We talked about this a little bit last week. It feels really isolating to be left out. Part of the reason we move towards the status quo is because it's easy to blend in. We know that there will be wide range acceptance in the status quo. And so breaking that trend, that trap, is to say, well, what can we do to ensure that this doesn't happen for our young people? Because we might be able to point to the data, but a sixth grader only cares about one data point. My friends have it, and I don't. And so that is where we need to kind of move towards helpful solutions. He lifts up 4. He says collective action problems require collective responses. And there are 4 main types of these collective actions that we're going to talk through this morning. First is volunteer coordination, or voluntary coordination. It's the idea that there will be support from the community, or maybe the church, making kind of a case to bind together to a certain purpose. There's an organization, it's a neat thing that they're doing. The group Wait Until 8th is a wonderful example of such coordination. Parents sign a pledge when their child is in elementary school that they will not be giving their child a smartphone until 8th grade. The pledge becomes binding only when 10 families with kids in that school and grade sign that pledge. The whole idea is to say, if you're not the only one, and we can guarantee you're not the only one, it's going to be a lot less burdensome. And the church can do similar things. Might we encourage families to pledge in these sort of ways? Can we get, maybe it's your grandchildren that you're thinking about as it relates to these issues. Can you support and encourage them to band together with other parents and say, well, here's the data. The parents of the children can contend with the data, even as the sixth grader might not be able to. But if we can make a bubble around our young and say, hey, I know a lot of students do have social media and a smartphone in sixth grade, but you and 9 of your closest friends don't. The ones that you're going to be spending time with, the ones that you kind of look to, the ones that will really be your future community, well, you are all participating in the same way. It's very bolstering. You can see the effect of that to know, oh yeah, you might still get some pushback. You might still say, well, I want it. But if they can't say, I'm the only one, you're like, no, Hubbell's down the street. You know that they don't either, and there's 8 other families. That 10 is a number I think just thrown out in terms it seems like enough to be supportive of the collective action. The second, yeah, go ahead.
I hate to interrupt.
No, please do.
But I want to interrupt you because before I forget it, it's the age thing. But anyway, basically, and I've shared with most of y'all that I work with teenagers because I prep them for their SATs. And they talk to me because they're one-on-one, so they feel safe.
Yeah.
But I think that a comeback that I would hear from them that is a little bit legitimate is that parents would say, this is how I know where she is and that she's out of her SAT class or she's here or there. And and parents feel almost as dependent in many ways as the teenagers themselves because they become used to staying in touch with their kids that way. It's become the norm.
It's a lifeline.
It's a safety feature. And
Yeah.
of course, we want to keep our young people safe and that connection, the GPS functions of our phones. I know you are where you say you are because I can check your iPhone to know that you're sitting in that place. We're going to talk about this. That's the third point as we move towards technological solutions. Because it is a valid point. Safety is something that we're looking at as the highest value for our young people, for our children.
And it's not just safety. They feel like they have to remind them. They do. They'll say, did you get to class on time? Whereas before, I think, I'm going to say when I grew up, my parents assumed I was going to be there. And I knew I'd better be there wherever there was.
Yes, and that's a valid point, and I think the larger conversation stems more in the kind of philosophy of parenting. When do we start giving more autonomy to our children? And we could look at it from a developmental standpoint of when they're able to take that. I would say there is sort of that natural transition moment as you're getting a middle schooler or a sixth grader in your household. Most parents should probably start to demonstrate that sort of relinquishing of control, even sometimes at the consequence of their child missing something or not doing. That's the right term to use, helicopter parenting, the idea that I need to hover around my child to protect them fully. I wish I had that data more available because I think it's a trend that has been studied, and we see even I'm sure in this resource, I talked about in the first week, failure to launch, where particularly our young boys were moving in a less meaningful way. They felt a little less purposeful in their existence. I don't think it's too much to speculate that an element of that is because they haven't had to work and overcome and build confidence on their own. And so where helicopter parenting is out of great love and intentional care, it can be a trap in itself because we might not be preparing our young people to move into a more autonomous place.
You also have a growth in homeschooling that takes children out of that mainstream public and private school environment and then controls it both socially and academically.
I think where our children's individual time is lesser, if our children have less time and space to socialize and figure out their own problems, we have to be that much more weary to these challenges. Homeschooling is a fantastic model that works well for many families. In line of that, I hope those who homeschool are intentional about creating opportunities for their children to be apart from them and apart from the home, because that's where there's going to be a lot of growth, is sometimes in the uncomfortable places that we can't control or we can't hover about them. We might actually really even speak to this a little bit and as a part of this class session. I want to move us towards the second item of collective action. This is social norms and moralization. And this is a tricky one because this is actually the community taking their voice, collective voice, and saying, we are going to not judge, not condemn, but oppose a status quo. And so for us to leave this room, if we band together and we said, we're going to be a message, the people in this room are going to say, when they're in conversations with any parents with teenagers, we're going to say, the data supports restricting phones and social media until students are 16 years old. That's going to be a direct confrontation to many of the families who have 16-year-olds in their home who have smartphones and social media. And so that sort of confrontation, that is a changing of the social norm. And the moralization is to say, these things are harmful for our young people. And because it's harmful, we have to take proactive, protective steps. And we shouldn't be so bashful about that. We can empathize with families and we can say, we know this is a really difficult conversation, that our teenagers, our 15-year-olds who already have smartphones and social media will really push back against this notion that we might actually restrict or pull away. Or maybe the 13 or 14-year-old that is about to get their social media or head into high school, that they're going to actually see their freedoms limited or restricted or pulled away altogether. Or the fifth grader who thinks, oh, this Christmas is going to be my Christmas for my smartphone, wakes up on Christmas morning and it's not the case. Because the conversations we're having are, boy, I would love to spoil you with the thing that you want, but it's just simply not healthy. It's not safe for you. And so the moralization isn't to say, look at us, self-righteous, we are in the right about this. It's to adopt a similar tone that we talked about last week with like a gentle and nurturing, but still direct. We're looking at the data and we want to protect our children. That becomes the push behind why we're saying things need to change. The third is technological solutions, and this comes up to what we're talking about with those parents who are desiring to be in contact with their children. There are safety features that are a part of every software update on their smartphones. Things like time limits, things like security controls where you cannot download certain apps. There's like mirror monitoring where you actually as a parent can see exactly what's going in and out of their phones. Those are safety features so that you can keep your child accountable. It's a tricky thing because as we talk about helicopter parenting, hovering over our children, just having full access to their phone seems like full access to a diary. And that's a little tricky in terms of how we want to implement trust. you heard a smartphone. Have you heard of a dumb phone?
Mhm.
It's what all phones used to be, where you have certain capabilities like calling, maybe texting, maybe GPS, but not access to the internet. And so I think products like that will become more popular. That will be especially helpful from your like 5th to 9th graders, where they can still utilize a lot of the most foundational safety features of the technology we have. Parents can still call and you can be in conversation. But we're going to have to navigate that as it comes and changes. And it's not cool. If all your friends have a smartphone and you're like, my phone's dumb compared to your smartphone, that's where again the binding together and making it sort of a collective option would be good. If all of your friends, your 10 closest buddies, all have dumb phones, well then that might be okay. But this is where it's a balancing act. This is the work of it. We have to figure out how to have these conversations and move towards these solutions. The final thing of collective actions, or final item, is that laws and rules. Over the next decade, I'm sure that we are going to see a lot of this stuff legislated. There's going to be some interaction with what the government is doing and how we come to our phones. I'm not talking about censorship here. I'm talking about in the same way we have laws to say you can't drive a car until you're 16, you cannot drink alcohol until you're 21. That's the sort of conversation I'm leaning in towards. What sort of protective measures can we keep internet and social media companies accountable? Can we say your terms of service right now for a 9-year-old to get on Instagram right now, they just have to click a button that says I'm 13. It's very easy for a 9-year-old to say I'm 13 when they click up a button. And so what can there be done to prove verification? How can that change? And so as these things, I think, start to get into the law and legislation side of our society, take note of it, be attentive to it, and then vote what you think is protecting our young people. That's sort of the one of the available paths before us. Now here's where we come to another tension point, but it's a way better tension point. It's more fun to figure out this problem. If we start to limit or restrict or remove social media, phones, internet access from our teenagers, so I'm saying 15 and younger, we are creating a lot of time for them to fill. And so the status quo right now is to say, well, be on your phone for a couple hours each day. And now we're restricting that, and now you have a couple hours each day to do different things. And what we don't want to do is, in a part of our conversation, be like, well, now we have your stuff, figure it out. Because now, you all have heard I'm bored. That's annoying. And we'll hear more if we restrict and remove their technology. And so what can we supplant the status quo with? What can we move our young people towards that will benefit them, that will bring, not only are we removing the thing that is challenging their health, what can we substitute it with that will incorporate healthy, good things for our young people? Yeah, give them a kickball, right. That's really one of the elements of what I'm going to talk about in these two lists. I've separated these out between ages 6 to 13 and 13 to 18 because of life stage and what they're going to be doing. Also, a 6-year-old and a 13-year-old are experiencing very different things. And so take what I'm saying with a grain of salt. This largely depends on the ability and autonomy and the safety of the neighborhood that is surrounding our young people. But we want to practice letting our children get out of our sight. And this is where I love that you all have come to this class. This is a great group to come to this class. I was hoping maybe peers of mine with young children would even entertain coming to this class, because it's nice to get ahead of these things. And it's nice to start thinking this way before it becomes a surprise and a crisis. And so as a part of my thinking about young families, how can you start to plan for this? This is an integral part of that. Practice letting our children get out of sight. I have a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old. They are rarely out of our sight because it would be unsafe for them to be out of our sight for very long. My 2-year-old's a climber. So in particular, he's one that we can't let out of our sight too much. But as Bennett starts to get 5, 6 years old, what can I allow him to do on his own truly? That starts to build confidence that he's able to overcome certain problems in front of him. It also starts to, lower my stress as I see him being successful and doing some tasks on his own. And so by the time they're maybe 10 years old, my son walked to school as a 10-year-old. Can he have a neighbor buddy where he walks to school? That's getting less and less common, or more so the age is shifting. How old were you when you walked to the school or the grocery store?
6.
6. Now, that's 2 years old. My 4-year-old son at 6. I'm not letting him walk to that. That's what, at least that's the temptation. No way. The world is different, right? We feel that way. The statistics don't actually support that. In terms of violent crime, that's not actually kidnapping. That the world has not changed. It's our engagement with the news and social media. There's certain elements that we always have to be wary about. Some to say that the world is a very safe and easy place. We need to take safety precautions always, especially the younger our children are. But yes, you might have walked to the school or the grocery store when you were 6, 7, 8 years old. Now the trends are like 10, 11, 12. That's a significant shift in our trust of our youngest kids walking to school by themselves. But that's some of the work. How can we sort of recapture? Maybe it will never be 6 again. It might be 8 instead of 12. Where we give honest autonomy to our children. That's something that should be a part of the conversation. Where there is groups, there is safety. Could we bring a neighborhood together? This is the meeting. If you stand in the corner of this street and this street, 6 other kids are going to join you every morning, and then the 7 of you are going to walk to school. Those are some of the creative problem solvings that we need to commit to. Encouraging sleepovers and then not micromanaging them. It's low-hanging fruit like that. Whereas we are trying to create autonomy in a safe environment so that they can problem solve. I struggle with this on the playground with 4-year-olds. I want to intervene because I'm looking at a 4-year-old and another 4-year-old not handling the situation well. They're very immature. And so as they try to manage these things, the temptation is to jump in and say, well, how about you take a turn and then you take a turn? I'm hearing and I'm being coached to take a step back and saying, let them figure it out. They will then become more confident, realizing I can be a problem solver. I can come to the conclusion that sharing is and when that it's so much more formative for them as they experience these things independently from a parent hovering over them. And then providing a significant amount of time for free play. We're a very over-programmed culture. You're aware of this. How many sports and clubs and things are young people involved with? When I was growing up, I would have like 2 practices a week. That's very unusual now. Now it's 5, 6 practices a week for any sport that you're doing. Every week of every season, and then that doesn't include youth group, that doesn't include a job, you are really quick to be over-programmed as a youth in today's world. And so trying to create space for free play, meaning give them a kickball and say, hey, go outside, explore a little bit. Nature is you all, I can guarantee, have formative encounters with nature, with God's created order around you. In fact, that's probably a place where you have connected with God. Whether it be the beach or the mountains, whether it's a sunset or a sunrise, whether it's whatever, the trees, you've seen and been a part of something that is beautiful and natural, and that's a good place for us to meet God, and it's a good place to usher our children towards, to meet God, and to just figure it out a little bit on their own in a safe environment. That was still more so for our 6 to 13-year-olds. For our 13 and 18-year-olds, we should be really reliant on our children's participation in home life. I have every intention of, as soon as my child can safely handle a knife and a hot stove, to move him towards cooking. You get to participate in making this meal. Maybe not the primary part of the meal. Maybe it's like the can of peas or something. But like this is going to be your job. And then let him graduate into the bigger thing. Yeah, he's not doing the pork loin in the oven yet. But as we can start to move some autonomy and some independence and some confidence-building procedures in the home, that's great. Why am I the one vacuuming all the time? He can hold a vacuum. That sort of thing. Chores are great. And it's worth the fight. It's worth the confrontation if our children push back. And it's like, yeah, you are an equal member of this household. That's what we're saying, even in their defiance of us. Yes, we care about your input and your impact on this home. It's good to reinforce, even when it's an issue, even when it's a fight. So things like that are really important. Giving them a little more, again, this is 13 to 18, a little more autonomy when it comes to transportation. Can they arrange their own ride? Can they take a public bus? Can they? That right now is so, I think, intimidating for so many folks. That's it's not my preference. Can they do a bike? How might they get to a place? Can they figure out where they need to go and then be a part of making their own solutions? Even if that's them coordinating me, the driver, but letting them We've left we might program a fourth grader's life. We might say, I've set this play date up for you. We let our 13 and up figure it out. Let them coordinate what they want to do. Part-time jobs, love part-time jobs. I hope our young people will continue to be a part of the workforce. It's humbling, it's productive, it gives them autonomy when they start to have their own income, when they have the freedom, you remember this, the freedom to buy kind of your thing that you want. Probably not a responsible purchase, but it was yours. It was your ability to make that choice that felt so gratifying to the hard work that you've been putting in. I worked at this restaurant called Anthony's. I've been around from Washington State. I was a busboy. It was a seafood restaurant. It was kind of a nice seafood restaurant, and so I'd often leave with like $30, $40 in cash and tips every shift. And that $30 and $40 was turned to fast food like that. And so, but I was able to do that, and it felt so gratifying to drive myself, pay for my own gas, and buy my own unhealthy meal, because that was me becoming an adult, and that's still true for our youth today. And then this is going to be our pivot point to the church. How do we support them in the church? Is finding places for them to lead. Our young people are very capable. They're articulate. They're bright. They know how to read. They know how to write. They can do the things that we do in church worship, in service, in fellowship. Our young people really have a place in the church. And I think we would like to say that confidently. We would probably proclaim that message. In Palmacia Presbyterian Church, our youth and children are valued. But have you ever been sitting in worship and there's a crying baby next to you? And you've been a little tempted to glare, or even just avoid eye contact, though feeling internally, this is obnoxious, this is loud. Why isn't this parent taking their child out? Okay, that was the third cry. I was fine with the first two, but now it's getting ridiculous. We probably had this internal monologue because we get that challenged. Our teenagers, have you seen them on Wednesday night? Have you been at a Wednesday dinner walking around? And you probably look at their little table and you go, I want to stay away from that table. We want to declare young people are a part of Palmacia Presbyterian Church, but we also probably want a healthy distance at times because they seem maybe a little less approachable or accessible to us. That's the status quo we're going to try to break, even as it relates to the culture of this place. It's not a passive, it's not just a simple, quiet accepting of children and youth in our presence. It's a very proactive encouraging and helping and guiding and training our young people and children to know that they are beloved in this place. It's polite for you to be sitting next to an ornery 3-year-old in the worship service. It's polite for you to not mention or say something negative about them. It's gracious as the 3-year-old's having a hard moment in church to look at mom or dad and smile and say, it's okay, we're glad you're here. How big of a shift is that for that family sitting there? He's probably self-conscious of this moment. Oh, my 3-year-old is pounding on the pews. Oh my gosh, all the focus is here. I feel terrible. Should I bring him out? Should I leave him? You have, does it sound like the voice of experience? Yeah, so we have this internal moment. And for any of you to lean back in the pew and smile and say, we're glad you're here. It's a joyful noise to us. What does Jesus say about children? Let them come to me. For such as these, the kingdom of God belongs. We need to really enact that in our church, even when that's hard because our own patience and frustrations are present in our bodies as we're trying to listen to Pastor John's sermon. This is true. But we've got to engage with the challenge so that we can change the culture and make things not just a polite place to be on Sunday morning at Palmacia Pres, but a welcoming, loving environment for all children and youth. Wednesday night dinner. Yes, you've taken the long way to your table to avoid the youth table. Let's go right to them. Let's go around. And right now, you're just the old stranger. But you have a responsibility as old stranger in their midst to say, hey, we're glad you're here. You enjoying dinner? Yeah? And they look at you and they're kind of like, how are you? Yeah, but mission accomplished. Your mission in that moment is not to be a particular mentor to them. It's to be a welcoming presence. And they might say, oh, I feel welcome here. Because maybe they feel a little self-conscious because they are on the island of misfit children and they're sitting here and they feel like everyone's kind of buzzing around them. That interaction is really helpful. As you leave this class this morning, as you're heading into worship or heading to the parking lot, if you see a child or a youth or a family, and you encourage them by just acknowledging their presence. Good morning, we're glad you're here. This is not magic, this is not complex. It's just simple encouragement to their very presence. But especially when there's the crying baby or the toddler having a fit, it's in those moments that we, I think, cannot just be, again, polite, or encouraging, but a true formative encounter for family. If it's Christmas Eve service and that baby's having a hard time, if you all can resonate, if you have an ornery baby, a colicky baby, you go and share that. Oh, my little Johnny, he would not ever be quiet. You're doing great, Mom. That's a huge encouragement that goes such a long way. I'm going to close our time with a little bit of scripture before I ask if there's any other questions. I think this is in your handout. This is from 1 Timothy. 1 Timothy 4:12 is the battling cry of youth ministries across the nation. Let no one despise your youth, but set the believers an example in speech and conduct, in love and faith and purity. I want to contextualize that for us. John Ryder, will you read this passage so that I can get a sip of water real quick?
This is 1 Timothy 4, starting with verse 6. If you put these instructions before the brothers and sisters, you will be a good servant of Christ Jesus, nourished on the words of the faith and of the sound teaching that you have followed. Have nothing to do with profane and foolish tales. Train yourself in godliness, for while physical training is of some value, godliness is valuable in every way, holding promise for both the present life and the life to come. The saying is sure and worthy of full acceptance. For to this end we toil and suffer reproach, because we have our hope set on the living God, who is the Savior of all people, especially of those who believe. Command and teach these things. Let no one despise your youth, but set the believers an example in speech and conduct, in love, in faith, and purity.
Thanks, John. This is nothing new. This has been the role of the church of worshiping communities ever since there have been worshiping communities. To train up our young people. We quoted that Proverbs. Nourished on the words of the faith and of the sound teaching that you have followed. This is our legacy. To teach our young people what has been so formative and sustaining to us as we've been nurtured in our faith. A big question we should ask, how are our young people, how are our youth navigating their faith? Well, pretty similar to just about everything else they're navigating. Social media, TikTok, algorithms have a large say-so in what they're learning about God and theology, about faith and ministry in the church. And as we've noted in this class, the algorithms are just about engagement. It's not some honest conversation. It's just barraging you with a lot of the same content. I would say that a lot of the things that my students bring towards me in question are very different teachings than what Palmacia Presbyterian Church would teach about who God is and what it means to follow Jesus Christ. And so we know they're up against it, even as it relates to their faith, with how they use their phone and their apps and the internet. And so we're tasked with helping them navigate that. And just as you are nurtured in worship and in fellowship and in service, we need to not only model that, we need to invite them into that. Because that's going to be the same thing for them. You had a formative camp experience. You did a mission trip that was hugely formative. We need to support those ministries to continue in the ways that they always have. We do. I'm the youth chaplain. Well, we do these things. But we need to ensure that we do these things and that we fund them and that we provide scholarships so that all can partake in them. We need to invite them and structure faith formation in a way that's appealing to them. Might there be a class that we can put on that supports our young people actually attending as full-fledged members? And I'm not just talking about confirmed members who have gone through confirmation or technically members, but all youth who might glean something important as it relates to the education of this place. If we're going to tell them to live into their faith fully and confidently, if that's our expectation or our hope for them, be a part of us, be a part of the family of faith. We want you here. We have to let them be here. And it's not just about assimilating to how we understand faith and theology and worship. It's about heeding their voice in the same conversation. How are you coming to interpret this text? Yes, their life experience is limited, small. They will be wrong so often. We just leave space for that to happen, authentically in relationship with us, and we welcome them, we engage them, we share our space with them, and again, I can't stress this enough, it's not about being polite, it's not about just accepting their presence, but it's about welcoming them and nurturing them with our presence, that they feel like a part of Palmacia Presbyterian Church, that every room they enter, everything they participate in, they think, I belong here. And I can do this. And let me say this, one last caveat before I open up for any final questions. We have 2 youth services each and every year. Youth Sunday, which is typically the second Sunday after Easter, and the confirmation service, which is the culmination of their 6-week confirmation course. Those are 2 of the smallest attended Sundays, not last year. Last year we did really great on Youth Sunday. The confirmation service is at 6 p.m. It's a Vesper service, and so that largely caters to their family systems. Those should be 2 of the largest services at Palmacia Presbyterian Church, because it's the community in their very presence in being showing, oh, we are glad that you are here. We are supportive of the fact that you can lead worship and lead us in prayers and read these scriptures, that with your senior speeches you can proclaim the gospel. Our presence, our numerical presence is telling in that. And so as we think about status quo, you might need to call your friend and neighbor and elbow them along to Youth Sunday as we think about this year and the ways that we lift up young people. That's what I have for you all. I would love any questions, comments you might make in terms of your experience or how we might move forward. I'll go here and then here.
Okay, Jeff and I really enjoyed working with you, because we had teenagers. And one of the things that we have done is invite the Cedar Creek counselors to our home for dinner every year, and have absolutely adored every time they come. There's so much more that we would like to help do. When we were younger, we did Just Say No, the sex education. But now we don't feel like there's any place for an older couple to be involved in these. We feel like if we go up to the table and say, hey, they don't know who we are. And it's like, these 2 weird old people are, harassing us. And it's very, it's very uncomfortable. If there was a way that we could do something where we're working with them in something, where, so anyway, that's my.
John's going to write down that note so that we can discuss more practically. I would say harass them first. Do harass them with love. Let them know that they're truly welcome. John and Kira Wells, Donna and Hal Morrison, Cynthia and John Godding. I'm just listing 6 recent volunteers who have come to help cook or who are going to cook on one of our youth summer trips. And all their children are grown. They are in the stage of they have no grandbabies or on the cusp of having grandbabies, and our students love them. They are adored. It's about finding a way to facilitate those relationships, because you all have not become irrelevant if you are not feeling so young and spry. You are still a source of great wisdom and care, and you have all the gifts that you've always had. And that can absolutely be finding intersections with our young people. That's more my job and John's job, to make sure that we can facilitate that. We talk about our multi-generational events. We have our all-church events like the field day we had at Davis Island last year, the Living Nativity. That puts us in proximity with each other, but not much more than that. And so I hear what you're saying. I hear it as a request, and I think we will consider that. What can we do even in this Advent season that puts us in dialogue, and not just proximity, but in relationship with each other? Thank you.
Try musical chairs on Wednesday night.
There we go, musical chairs. All are welcome to participate.
I would love to know about how many, if we could find out somehow or other, how many 13 to 17-year-olds we currently have in our congregation. And to make it kind of a goal, I don't know how exactly, I'll think on it, but how to report back, maybe monthly or bi-monthly, to see that number grow, to encourage to see that number grow from however, let's say, I don't know, I just picked 13 to 17, that's kind of.
I would say, so we have that data in terms of, we would track that. I don't know if that's being Presbyterians or. Yeah, so I would say we have about 400 teenagers in our program that we are communicating with, 400 families of teenagers. We will probably see, and I'm using 13 to 18 here because senior, and I would say over the course of the summer, which is where I have our most formative largest trips, we are probably interacting with about 200 different students. So we have a base of 400 people that we've had any contact with ever since birth through their teenage years now. That's just a part of our computing system. Then we have about 200 teenagers that we've interacted on a yearly basis. We have then about 70, 80, 90 teenagers who are very consistently active throughout the year. So that's probably the number you're most interested in. The 60 to 90, actually, really, confidently 90 students that are coming in probably at least once a month, who are identifying us at least as their youth group, if not their church. And so that's a good, healthy number. We have left Christendom. I don't know if you were aware of this. All national mainline denominations are trending down in terms of membership and participation and worship, and that's true across all ministries. If you look at the generational trends, you will see engagement or participation with faith-based activities on a steep decline. This continues with Gen Z and will certainly continue with Gen Alpha. We're up against it in the church realm of life. It's because the society around our young people don't prioritize church and faith like they used to. This is just cultural shifts that we're continuing with. So I love this goal. How do we engage them? It's not to say that we should just accept this downward trend, but I think I don't think the beginning of the change, meaning we're already above national averages considerably in our youth program here in terms of our output. But I think it's about what I'm already describing. Belonging precedes participation. So the more that we stoke, and once we can truly care well for the kids already in our midst, that growth will start to come. Because we only have a handful of youth volunteers, we only have a couple paid staff. If we look at the resources that it takes in a very highly relational ministry, it's people, it's mentors.
One of the things that this church used to be involved in was the Christian athletes.
Yeah, the schools will not allow us to have any presence on campus anymore. I actually mentioned, I recall you sharing that in our listening meetings that we were having, because it was such a wonderful intersection with the community and the church that is no longer a viable option. Even the private schools. So when I first came down here, this 13 years ago, I was really desiring to be on the school premises. Even at our Christian private schools, I was not allowed anywhere. And it's only become stricter.
Well, they invited them to come to the church property, not on the school property itself. And then there were activities that fed into Cedar Kirk and some other things. But if you want to see something inspirational, you might want to Google up what happened at Ohio State. It started with 4 of the athletes deciding if they wanted to follow some more Christian faith. And now the entire team, and I'm not sure how they do it because it's a public institution, but the entire team is now following the Christian faith, and they're praying before the game.
Yeah.
And they're engaging in all kinds of other activities. I mean, I was amazed that it was happening, but
whenever we can find those intersections between how do we build out already established communities, growth and fruit often happen in those places. It's unfortunate that the world today is pretty skeptical of religious institutions, and so we have a lot more limitations than we had even 20 years ago, let alone 40 years ago when it was really trusting of our environment. Friends, I've let you go to worship, and I close with a word of prayer, and then I don't have to be in worship, and so if you'd like to continue any conversation with me, I'm happy to stay for a
I
moment.
just want to say, maybe to give to Jonathan that, when we stand and we all greet each other at church, could we maybe modify that little speech and say, let's all welcome each age group?
I love that. I love a notion that moves us towards other people, not just our normal
And
comfortable
just use
paths.
that, kind of that verbiage, might
Yeah.
be nice.
That's my little boy right there. Hi, Bennett. Thanks for being here. Let me close this with a word of prayer, and then I'll let you go. It'll be a brief one. Lord, thank you for your church and how you've called us to love its young people. Continue to inspire in us a spirit that moves us towards relationship and authenticity and help and compassion, so that the young people in this place might be nurtured in your love. We make these prayers in your son's name. Amen. All right, thank you, friends. Take care. Have a lovely week.
Happy birthday.
Thank you very much.
Happy